Our scripture on this evening is Psalms chapter 55. I would like for you to read this chapter in its entirety, but for the sake of time, we'll start with reading verse number 1. Again, Psalms chapter 55, and we'll read verse number 1. It says, "Give ear to my prayer, O God, and do not hide yourself from my supplication." Again, the entire chapter of Psalms 55 will be beneficial in understanding what verse number 1 is addressing. But let's just talk for a moment about getting on the road to recovery. Because the psalmist here, David, is trying to recover from three things that happen to all of us at some point or another in life: adversities, betrayal, and conflict. The ABCs of life: adversities, betrayal, and conflict. What I have discovered in pastoral counseling is there are a lot of people who like to talk about what's wrong, who's wrong, and how they feel. A smaller portion of people are actually looking to recover. And I'm trying to get more of us to get in the mindset of how do we rise from the falls of life, as opposed to just constantly talking about the fact that we had a fall. We know there's adversities. We know there's betrayal. We know there's conflict. But just talking about it and staying in our feelings, and everyone who's willing to listen and pat us on the head, it does not resolve the problem. It does not put us on the road to recovery. So in Psalms 55, there are some things to notice. David experienced hurt. In verse number 3, he talks about having had enemies. He talks about the wickedness around him. And verses 4 and 5, he mentions the emotional toll that is taken on him. And verses 13 and 14 of Psalm 55 are really powerful, in that he talks about betrayal. For the sake of emphasis, in verse 13, "But it was you, a man my equal, my companion and my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God and the throne." So think about David's hurts. Again, verse 3, enemies and wickedness around him. Verse 4 and 5, an emotional toll. Verses 13 and 14, betrayal, someone obviously close to him. And then he mentions something that happens to us. We want to hide. We want to run. Because in verse number 6, he says, "Oh, that I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and be at rest." That's both idealistic and filled with flaws at the same time. It is a desire for escape. It is a desire to achieve peace by avoiding the reality. Even if we have the wings of a dove and we're able to fly away and be at rest, how long do you think Satan would let that rest exist? Problems know how to find us when we're not looking for them. But what I want to get you to is how to recover. How do you deal with adversities, betrayal, and conflict? Enemies, wickedness, emotional tolls, betrayal, the inability to escape or to avoid it. In verses 16 and 17 of Psalms 55, he says, "As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning, and at noon I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. And then verse 18, he has redeemed my soul in peace from the battle that was against me. David comes to the conclusion that you cannot run from your problems. Though he wanted to fly away and be at rest if it were possible, he came to understand that avoiding them does not help you to achieve peace. But he did learn that you can give your problems to the Lord. So here are just three things to notice in verses 16, 17, and 18. In verse 16, he teaches that you must make a personal choice. As for me. One of the problems that we discover in talking with people is they spend so much time finding out who's to blame and why everybody else is at fault for their unhappiness. We must make a personal choice. Second, it must be a persistent choice. Did you notice in verse 17, he didn't just say, I was going to pray, but he mentions three spans of time: in the evening, the morning, and at noon. And I find it interesting that he mentions evening first. He doesn't say morning, noon, and evening, but evening comes first, which suggests to me that he had a long night, just like we've had some long nights. But he not only made a personal choice, he was going to be persistent, because he was going to pray in the evening, pray in the morning, and pray at noontime. We've got to be persistent in talking to the Lord if we're going to persevere through the problems and pains of life. And then a peaceful choice in verse 18. It says, he has redeemed my soul in peace. This does not mean that the adversities are gone, the betrayal is gone, or the conflicts are gone. Surely there were still enemies and wickedness and betrayal and the emotional toll that all of that took. But he says that he has redeemed my soul in peace, which means that even if outward circumstances don't change, the inward orientation can experience the peace of God, that peace that passeth understanding. So if we want to get on the road to recovery, we can't stay in our feelings. We can't continue to complain and continue to blame. We can make a personal choice, a persistent choice, and a peaceful choice. And collectively, that's the right choice. This has been another installment of A Few Minutes with the Minister.